10 minutes have passed, and this is the 5th time she's checked. Still nothing. The message she sent hours ago remains unanswered, and that silence gnaws at her more than any insult ever could. Just a week ago, this man could have been hers without effort. She hesitated, she doubted, and he felt like just another option. But now, by doing something so few men have the courage to do, he has become the only thing occupying her thoughts. It isn't because he is taller, richer, or better looking. It's because he chose a path that 90 out of 100 men never dare to take. He pulled back. Instead of flooding her with replies, instead of clearing his evenings, instead of orbiting around her like a satellite waiting for commands, he withdrew. He became scarce, unavailable, hard to reach. And in that moment, the balance of power shifted. He stopped chasing, and suddenly she was the one lying awake, replaying every detail, wondering why she had slipped from the center of his attention. Men assume women crave endless attention, constant reassurance, the stream of messages that never ends. But watch what happens when they actually get it. The attraction dies faster than a fire smothered in water. Desire isn't born from abundance, it's born from uncertainty. You've seen this pattern yourself. Maybe you were the man who responded instantly, who sent good morning texts before the sun was up, who filled every silence with validation. And what happened? Her replies grew shorter, her calls less frequent, her energy colder. What was once interest became indifference, and eventually, distance. It is maddening because it feels like generosity should be rewarded. But the opposite occurs. The more a woman knows she has you, the less she wants you. The moment mystery disappears, attraction suffocates. A man who is always available is a man stripped of value. A man who abandons his schedule for any woman is signaling that his time is worthless. And when you offer yourself too easily, you announce without words that you're not worth the effort. Women may not chase like men do, but they hunt in their own way. Their chase is psychological. They create resistance. They throw up obstacles. They pull back just to see if you'll lean forward. It isn't malice, it's instinct. It's their way of testing your strength. When she cancels plans at the last minute, it isn't always about work or family. Sometimes, it's a probe. Will you collapse and beg for another chance? When she grows quiet or distant, it's not always because she lost interest. Sometimes, it's a measure. Will you panic and flood her with reassurance? Think of these moments as nature's exam, and most men fail spectacularly. They leap over every hurdle she places, desperate to prove they care. They lean so far forward that they topple. They plead as if one dinner date is the oxygen keeping them alive. But then there are the others, the men who don't scramble when she pulls away, the men who don't explain themselves when she tests, the men who don't crumble under the pressure of uncertainty. Those men become puzzles she can't solve. They become challenges she cannot conquer. They transform into the mountain she feels compelled to climb. That craving, to win what isn't easily won, burns deeper than flowers, sweet words, or constant availability ever could. The truth is, the challenge isn't about games. The most attractive men aren't performers running some carefully rehearsed script. It's about living a life with gravity, a life that won't be abandoned for the possibility of romance. It's about being grounded enough that her storms don't toss you off course. It's about being whole enough that her approval cannot define your worth. When you embody those qualities, not as tricks, not as tactics, but as who you are, you naturally become the very challenge she is wired to pursue. Philosopher Soren Kierkegaard once said, "The most painful state of being is remembering the future, particularly the one you can never have." That is exactly what fuels attraction. The tension between wanting and having. The uncertainty of whether she can secure your attention, whether she will matter to you tomorrow. This is where her imagination works overtime, filling in the blanks with stories about who you might be, what you might be doing, why you're not immediately available. And paradoxically, that space is where her desire grows the strongest. Picture two men. One answers every text in under a minute, drops everything to meet her, and showers her with reassurance whenever she's cold. The other doesn't rearrange his life for her whims, responds when he's genuinely free, and treats her interest as one aspect of his world, not the whole of it. Which one does she think about when she's alone at night? Which one is replaying in her mind while she waits for the next notification? The answer is obvious, and yet most men keep sabotaging themselves. thinking that more effort means more attraction. But attraction is not a transaction. It isn't a vending machine where you insert enough effort to earn her desire. Attraction is a fire, and too much wood too fast will suffocate the flames. True challenge isn't about holding back on purpose. It's about being the kind of man whose life already demands his attention. It's about becoming someone so complete, so purposeful, that she must fight for a place in your world instead of assuming she owns it. And here lies the turning point. Once you realize that value isn't performed but lived, you'll understand why the most magnetic men don't chase approval. They draw it without asking. They don't explain themselves when tested. They let her imagination do the work. And that imagination is far more powerful than anything you could say in a dozen text messages. But what does it actually mean to live as that man, not in theory, but in practice? That's the next question we must face. In her mind, a man who is not immediately available is not only desirable, he's a signal. He signals that he has standards, that his time is valuable, that his world doesn't revolve around her presence. He carries himself as someone who already has a full life, one that doesn't bend simply because she entered the picture. That kind of man is rare, and rarity creates value. This is why when she cancels plans last minute, what you do next speaks louder than any apology you could send. Most men expose themselves instantly. They rush to reschedule, sending a flood of texts to prove they're still interested. They call to check if she's okay, thinking they're showing care, when in reality, they're showing dependency. And every attempt to fix the situation only digs them deeper into the hole. Each frantic message reveals that she was never competing for his time. He was competing for hers. Neediness reveals itself in subtle ways. It comes through how quickly you respond, how long your messages are, how anxiously you seek reassurance. When she cancels and you immediately scramble to lock down another date, what you're really saying is, I have nothing else going on. When you check in repeatedly, you're revealing, I'm already too invested. And when you overreact to minor turbulence, you announce without words, I can't handle rejection. The truth is, the needy man doesn't just want reassurance, he depends on it. He cannot function without knowing exactly where he stands. Ambiguity feels like death to him. So he rushes to define everything before the connection has even had time to breathe. He demands clarity too soon, exclusivity before it's earned, guarantees before there's trust. And in doing so, he kills the very tension that fuels desire. Because here's the paradox. Ambiguity is where attraction grows. The uncertainty of not knowing exactly what you mean to her keeps her thinking about you when she should be asleep. That space between wanting and having is what makes desire stretch and intensify. Once certainty arrives too early, once you've defined it all before it's ready, the energy collapses. Predictability is the death of romance. Think of it this way. When she knows exactly when you'll text, exactly how you'll respond, and exactly what you'll do next, you stop being a mystery. You become furniture, comfortable, reliable, familiar, and easy to replace. Useful, perhaps, but uninspiring. The kind of thing people take for granted until it's gone. The kind of presence that never creates passion because it never leaves room for imagination. Mystery, on the other hand, isn't dishonesty. It isn't manipulation. It's restraint. It's knowing that not every thought in your head needs to be spoken. Not every feeling needs to be announced. She doesn't need to know you thought about her all day. She doesn't need to know you cleared your schedule on the off chance she'd call. She doesn't need to know you declined other plans because you were hoping she'd make herself available. When you broadcast all of this, you rob her of the thrill of wondering. Psychologists like Carl Jung often spoke about the unconscious as the true driver of behavior. That's exactly why delayed responses and selective engagement are so powerful. When you don't text back immediately, her unconscious begins filling in the blanks. What's he doing? Who's he with? Why isn't he like all the others who jump at my messages? That tiny gap between her expectation and your action becomes the fertile ground where desire multiplies. It isn't about playing games. It's about living in such a way that your world doesn't revolve around a screen or a notification. When you demonstrate that you have other priorities, that your attention is not always on standby, you create the natural push-pull dynamic that makes her invest more. Sometimes you're available, sometimes you're not. Sometimes you initiate, sometimes she does. Sometimes you're warm, sometimes you're focused elsewhere. This unpredictability doesn't confuse her. It intrigues her. Remember, people with full lives are not vending machines dispensing attention on command. They are complex, they have moods, they have goals, they have responsibilities. That complexity itself is magnetic. The man who is too easy to read is too easy to leave. And once she knows she can have you whenever she wants, the urgency disappears. Once she knows you'll always be there, the fear of losing you evaporates. And once she knows exactly where she stands, the excitement dies. This is why women become addicted not to availability, but to the emotional roller coaster created by mystery. It's the highs of connection, the lows of distance, the uncertainty of not knowing what comes next. That cycle of anticipation, tension, and release is what fuels the bond. And the men who ruin it are the ones who insist on certainty too soon, who insist on defining things before they've been earned. Here's another reality. When she is your only option, everything she does carries disproportionate weight. One ignored message feels catastrophic. One canceled plan feels like rejection. Every text exchange feels like it's life or death. But when you have other options, the dynamic changes entirely. Suddenly, one woman's silence isn't devastating. One rejection doesn't end your world. One pullback doesn't throw you off balance. This abundance doesn't just give you confidence, it creates it. And that confidence changes everything about how you show up. But how do you actually build that sense of abundance without faking it? How do you reach the point where you no longer pretend not to care, but truly don't depend on any single outcome? That answer leads us to the next level of attraction: abundance, options, and the reality that women are drawn to men other women want. A man with options doesn't panic when one woman pulls away. He doesn't send paragraphs when she cancels. He doesn't chase validation when she grows cold. Why? Because he knows he has choices. He understands that if she walks, another will stay. If she rejects him, another won't. If she tests, it doesn't matter, because his worth isn't resting on her approval. And this reality changes everything about his presence. Abundance transforms your entire posture. You don't have to pretend you're busy. You actually are. You don't have to fake indifference. You genuinely don't care as much because your emotional investment is spread across multiple possibilities. The man with only one option treats every date like it's a final exam. The man with many treats it like a conversation. That difference in weight is the difference between desperation and ease, between pushing her away and drawing her closer. Evolutionary psychology has long pointed out that women are instinctively drawn to men other women desire. It's the principle of social proof. If others want you, you must be valuable. If others compete for you, then winning you must be worth the effort. This is why scarcity destroys attraction. A man who acts like no one else wants him signals that he doesn't carry value in the social marketplace. A man surrounded by options, however, radiates worth without saying a word. But abundance doesn't just apply to dating multiple women. It's about your entire life. A man with rich friendships, meaningful goals, and passions that matter will naturally project the same energy as a man with romantic options. Women can sense when you have a full world and when you don't. They can feel the difference between the man who pretends to be busy and the man who actually is. This is where communication often ruins everything. Most men use their phone like a lifeline, clinging to constant messages, endless conversations, and reassurance on demand. But the truth is, your phone is not your friend in early dating. It's a tool, and like any tool, its power depends on how you use it. Used wisely, it sets up connections, creates anticipation, and builds momentum. Used recklessly, it destroys mystery, suffocates imagination, and collapses attraction. Think about it. When you spend hours texting, when you reveal your entire life story in messages, when you treat digital communication like intimacy, what reason does she have to see you in person? You've already given her the book without asking her to step into the story. And just like a book already read, there's nothing left to discover. The man who spills everything through a screen becomes predictable, and predictability is attraction's death sentence. The most powerful response after she cancels isn't a long explanation. It isn't pleading for another date. It isn't asking what went wrong. It's silence. Silence communicates confidence. Silence says, "My life continues with or without you." Silence echoes in her mind far louder than words ever could. When she wonders why you didn't respond, her own imagination supplies the answers, and those answers are often more compelling than anything you could have said. This doesn't mean ignoring her permanently. It means that your responses must come from a place of strength, not insecurity. Confident, playful, direct, never defensive, never apologetic, never needy. A simple, no problem, reach out when you're free carries 10 times the power of 3 paragraphs justifying your worth. The man who overcommunicates is often compensating. He fears that without constant reminders, she'll forget him. But the reality is the opposite. The man who communicates sparingly with purpose lingers longer in her mind. This is also where emotional stability becomes critical. Women don't only test through silence or cancellations, they test through storms. They want to see if you'll remain grounded when chaos arrives. They want to know whether you'll lose yourself in their mood swings, or if you'll stand firm as your own man. Every emotional storm she creates is not just drama, it's a test of your frame. Most men fail because they match her chaos with their own. She becomes upset and they scramble to fix it. She pulls back and they chase harder. She throws fire and they throw fire back. But the man who remains centered, who refuses to be pulled into the performance, proves himself in silence. He becomes the port in her storm, the anchor when her emotions crash like waves. And that stability is worth more than any gift or compliment you could ever provide. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." This is exactly why emotional mastery matters. If you can't control yourself, how can you lead in a relationship? If you crumble under her moods, how can she trust you under life's pressures? The man who is dictated by her actions is not in control. He is being controlled. And women instinctively know it. The most magnetic men aren't loud, arrogant, or overbearing. They're calm, they're composed. They don't need to shout because their presence speaks. Their confidence is quiet certainty, not noise. They can sit in discomfort without rushing for resolution. They can handle rejection without taking it personally. They maintain their balance regardless of external storms. And that calmness itself is intoxicating. But here's the paradox that breaks most men. The less you need her, the more she desires you. Not pretending not to care while secretly obsessing, but truly caring less because your life is full. Not being cruel, but being complete. That paradox is where attraction reaches its peak. And understanding it changes the entire game. But if the less you care, the more she invests, what does that really mean for how you live, love, and choose? Part 4. Here's the paradox most men never grasp. The more you chase, the faster she runs. The more you invest before it's earned, the less she values it. The more you need her, the less she wants you. Because need isn't attractive. Need signals lack. It tells her you're incomplete, that you're using her to fill a void, that you're not choosing her but depending on her. And dependency is repulsive because it comes with weight, pressure, and fear. What women actually find magnetic is not a man who ignores them, but a man who could want them deeply and yet doesn't need them to survive. A man who enjoys her presence but whose identity doesn't collapse if she leaves. In other words, men who are complete without her are the ones who inspire the deepest desire within her, as paradoxical as it sounds. She is more addicted to the man who can walk away than the man who would crawl back at any cost. Think about it. The men women whisper about, the ones they can't stop thinking of, are rarely the ones who smothered them with devotion on day one. They're the ones who had standards, who lived by boundaries, who refused to sacrifice dignity for approval. These men weren't performing strength. They embodied it. They weren't pretending to have options. They actually did. They weren't trying to seem busy. They were busy with lives that mattered. And that authenticity is what created the challenge she couldn't resist. Friedrich Nietzsche once observed, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." Replace how with who, and the truth becomes clear. The man with a mission, a reason larger than romance, carries a magnetic force. He doesn't orbit around her world, she orbits around his. His life is the center of gravity, and she wants to be drawn into it. This is why women become addicted to challenge. Not because they enjoy difficulty for its own sake, but because challenge implies worth. If you are not easily conquered, you will not be easily lost. If you have standards, you are valuable. If you have boundaries, you command respect. If you do not need her, you will not drain her. The difficulty is the signal. The value is the reality. And value cannot be faked. It must be built. Too many men waste energy trying to act challenging. They withhold replies on purpose. They try to play games with timing. They pretend to be busy while sitting at home scrolling endlessly. But women can sense the difference between performance and reality. They feel when you're acting, and they feel when you're living authentically. That's why the solution isn't tactics. The solution is becoming. Stop trying to look confident. Start building the kind of life that gives you confidence naturally. Stop pretending you have options. Start creating them through social strength, personal growth, and self-respect. Stop acting like your time is valuable. Start living in a way that makes it genuinely valuable. Because when you do, you won't need to play hard to get. You will be hard to get, not because you're avoiding her, but because your life is already full. The man who embodies value without performance is unforgettable. His absence is noticed, his presence is appreciated, his attention is earned. His time isn't scattered like confetti, it's guarded like treasure. When he invests in a woman, it means something, because he doesn't invest lightly. And this weight, this significance, is exactly what creates the addiction she can't escape. Remember, women aren't addicted to games. They're addicted to what games represent: scarcity, worth, choice. They aren't addicted to emotional turbulence for its own sake. They're addicted to the meaning behind it, that she hasn't yet fully won you, that her place isn't secured, that she must rise to meet your standard. The real addiction is to your value, and value isn't given, it's earned. This is why your focus must shift away from her and back onto yourself. Build a mission that consumes your attention. Build friendships that nourish you. Build skills that make you formidable. Build a body, a mind, and a life you are proud of. Do this. And women will be drawn into your orbit, not because you performed, but because you existed as a man who doesn't need their approval to thrive. And here is the ultimate irony. When you finally become that man, you no longer obsess about how to keep her addicted. You no longer scheme about how to win her over. You stop needing her validation entirely. Because your worth is self-sustained, her desire becomes a byproduct, not the goal. So let this be the shift. Stop asking, how do I make her want me? Start asking, how do I become the kind of man who doesn't need her to want me? When you do that, attraction stops being fragile. It becomes a natural consequence of who you are. And women, by their very nature, cannot help but be drawn to it. If these words resonate, if you see in them truths you've felt but could never articulate, then share them with other men who need this clarity. Let this message spread, because too many are still blind to the patterns that rule their lives. Like this if it struck something in you, and subscribe if you want more unfiltered truth about attraction, relationships, and the psychology behind them. Because the reality is this: the game is real. The patterns repeat. And until you master them, you'll remain lost in confusion. But once you do, you will never see women or yourself the same way again.